Takuan Sōhō was a Zen monk and philosopher whose influence spanned religion, martial arts and culture in early modern Japan. Though not as famous as Miyamoto Musashi or Senno Rikyu, he left an enduring mark on Zen Buddhism, Japanese swordsmanship, and the ethos of Bushidō. His life story involves political exile, the articulation of his unfettered mind, and a willingness to defy convention. By studying his journey, we see how the interplay of power, spirituality, and personal insight can shape ideas that remain relevant across centuries. Takuan was born in 1573, near the end of the Sengoku, Warring States, period, an era of near-constant conflict among feudal warlords called daimyo. Boundaries shifted constantly, alliances were fragile, and the samurai warrior class influenced the rise and fall of powerful clans. By the late 16th century, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu had begun unifying these fractured domains, paving the way for the Tokugawa shogunate. During this shift, samurai gradually took on new roles, serving as administrators and patrons of culture. Meanwhile, Zen Buddhism, especially the Rinzai school, fascinated them for its discipline, direct insight, and clarity under life and death pressures. From a young age, Takuan showed promise in religious study and was ordained a Rinzai monk before he reached his teens, a fairly common path for bright or devout youth. Life in a Rinzai monastery involved strict meditation, zazen, sutra study, and confronting koans, paradoxical riddles aimed at jolting the mind beyond logical thought. This rigor cultivated in Takuan a directness and candor that eventually intrigued and annoyed people in power. By early adulthood, he was recognized for his unwavering commitment to Zen principles and for refusing to compromise, even when confronted by powerful figures. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu became shogun, ushering in the Edo period, which replaced the constant wars of the Sengoku era with relative stability, but also imposed strict social hierarchies. The new Bakufu, military government, monitored temples and religious leaders carefully to prevent regional power plays. Takuan disliked such interference, arguing that authentic Zen practice needed to remain independent of political control. Tensions intensified in 1629 during the Purple Robe Incident, a dispute over the right to confer ceremonial purple robes traditionally given by the imperial court. Takuan publicly questioned the Bakufu's meddling in monastic affairs, an act seen as insubordinate by a regime that demanded compliance. As a result of the Purple Robe Incident, Takuan was exiled to Dewa in northern Japan. Exile typically severed one's ties to influential patrons and ended any public career. Yet Takuan turned isolation into an opportunity. He wrote letters to samurai and monks, distilling Zen's essence into direct, accessible language. Away from political turmoil, Takuan refined what became his most celebrated contribution, the concept often translated as the unfettered mind. These writings, circulated among influential warriors, would later be collected into treatises guiding both spiritual and martial training. Takuan's core teaching held that fixation and hesitation cripple the mind. When the mind stops on fear, pride, or a particular plan, it loses its responsiveness. Drawing on Zen's Mushin no Shin, or mind of no mind, he taught that one must remain fluid and unconstrained. For a samurai, freezing at the sight of an opponent's sword could be lethal. Takuan famously told the shogunate's swordmaster Yagyu Munenori, "If your mind stops at the opponent's sword, you'll be defeated in that instant." Yet this principle was not just for warriors. He compared the ideal state of mind to a mirror, reflecting everything yet holding on to nothing, an image that applies to artists, statesmen, or anyone facing stress and uncertainty. During Takuan's lifetime, Japan transitioned from civil war to an era in which samurai identity began including moral and spiritual dimensions. His guidance helped shape Bushido, which drew from Confucian ethics, Shinto traditions, and Zen philosophy. Takuan taught that a warrior should cut through inner illusions, fear, pride, anger, just as precisely as he might wield a sword. This was not simply about avoiding error in combat. It was also about acting ethically. He never argued that violence itself was always wrong, but he insisted that any use of force be guided by clarity rather than ego or rage. Although best known for his writings on martial arts, Takuan's cultural contributions were broad. He practiced Zen calligraphy, using bold strokes that expressed spontaneity and presence. He's also famously credited with popularizing Takuan Zuke, pickled daikon radish, still a staple side dish in Japan. This balance between high philosophy and simple domestic innovations reflected the Zen idea that everyday tasks are as vital to spiritual insight as formal meditation. Takuan demonstrated a consistent belief that Zen pervades life's details, whether in writing, swordsmanship, or the kitchen. Over time, Takuan's network of influential friends proved his greatest asset. Powerful samurai families and courtiers appealed to the authorities on his behalf, eventually winning his return from exile. By then, Takuan's writings and reputation had grown. Far from being dismissed as a rebel, he was recognized by many in positions of power as someone whose counsel was invaluable. Upon his return, he served as an advisor and sometimes abbot of prominent temples, though he resisted being locked into any permanent political role. His exile had paradoxically enlarged his influence. When Takuan died in 1645, he left behind a body of writing and a living tradition that influenced Zen practice, martial arts, and broader cultural activities. Modern practitioners of kendo, iaido, and other budo still study his words about mental fluidity and the mirror-like mind. Surprisingly, these centuries-old ideas align closely with contemporary sports psychology and mindfulness, which emphasize flow states and freedom from overthinking. Although Takuan addressed sword duels and the demands of feudal politics, modern readers find his guidance equally relevant to everyday stresses and high-pressure situations alike. One of Takuan's lasting messages is that deep insight must pair with moral responsibility. An unfettered mind does not mean reckless spontaneity, but rather the elimination of needless inner chatter so that one can see and act clearly. He recognized that warriors might need to wield the sword for just causes, but urged they do so without hatred or ego. This stance helped shape the ethical dimension of samurai life in an era when large-scale warfare had tapered off, but personal and moral challenges still existed. Takuan exemplified the Zen doctrine that there is no strict division between the sacred and the mundane. Calligraphy, tea ceremony, martial practice, and household chores were all fields for honing presence of mind. By urging people not to separate meditation hall from battlefield or kitchen, he contributed to a uniquely Japanese cultural view in which mindfulness pervades all tasks. His pickled radish and swift brushstrokes are just as much a testament to his spirit as his philosophical treatises. Takuan's influence persists because his teachings address universal mental barriers. Modern life teems with anxieties, from corporate boardrooms to sports arenas, and people still struggle with the same forms of mental fixation he warned against. His emphasis on not letting the mind stop and on remaining morally grounded speaks to anyone seeking clarity in demanding environments. Leaders and artists alike can find an anchor in his insistence that insight and compassion must go hand in hand. Takuan Sōhō embodies the union of spiritual depth, practical wisdom, and ethical conviction. He was a politically exiled monk who used isolation to cultivate a philosophy that transcended time and social strata. By reminding us that the mind must remain free, never frozen in fear or attachment, Takuan continues to guide martial artists, meditators, and anyone navigating life's turbulent waters. His story shows that a disciplined mind can exist hand in hand with spontaneity, and that ethical action emerges naturally from genuine clarity. Above all, he invites us to release our mental knots, move with unhesitating presence, and ground every moment, whether on the battlefield or in the kitchen, in unwavering integrity.